All right. So, um, I want to welcome everyone here tonight. This is wonderful to see everybody. It's 5:30 on Wednesday, the 16th of October, and you are joining us for a joint caucus forum. And it's such a pleasure to have Representative Pamela Herndon here. She is the chair or president uh, or or leader of the Black Caucus. And ma'am, I'd really like to turn it over to you to introduce your colleagues so we can get down to business here. Ma'am?
So, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here with you, Claudia Reisner, and all of the members of the Veterans Caucus, and to be joining and putting on in collaboration with the Black Caucus this very important topic as we look at alcohol alleviation. I want to, before introducing your panel, I would like to introduce a couple of my colleagues. I'm really happy and excited that we have Senator Harold Pope Jr. with us today. So he is the first African American to sit in the Senate in the state of New Mexico. So Senator Pope, we are very happy to see you, and maybe raise your hand so they can see you there. And then one of the youngest members of our legislature is here with us, and she law school, so she's sleep deprived, but her education level is like zooming. She's none other than Representative Christina Parajon. So we're really happy to see her. And I don't see any more of my colleagues on here. I hope I haven't missed anybody. Before introducing our esteemed panel, and it is great to see these are three of the most empowered, the most dedicated, the most women who are absolutely focused on making sure that we are doing the best for every single person in the state of New Mexico to prevent addiction and substance abuse, particularly along the lines of alcohol. So with that, I'm going to introduce the senior senator first. She is from Bernalillo County. She represents District 16. She is a retired law professor. She is none other than Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez. It's a pleasure to have you on this panel. We also have with us the junior senator, Senator Shannon Pinto, who is from District 3, representing both McKinley and San Juan counties. She is Senator Shannon Pinto with a history of working in the legislature. So thank you. And finally, one of our newer senators representatives who is joining the panel. It is none other than the representative from District 44, representing Bernalillo and Sandia districts. She is District 44, Representative Kathleen Cates. Representative Cates, are we going to see your beautiful face tonight?
You may or may not see my face, but you'll definitely hear me. I am driving to Santa Fe right now, so
All right.
multitasking.
Well, with that, I think it's wonderful. We're going to turn it over to our panel, who's going to give the introduction about how this legislation was started to even look at the idea of having alleviation in alcohol, and what does that mean, and how are we going to reduce substance abuse and addiction. And so the senior senator is going to kick this off, Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez. So tell us how this all started, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Pamela. And every time I have to follow you, my heart just sinks because your voice just sings. You're such a great speaker. And I also want to say I'm senior to Senator Pinto by 6 months, I believe. But I am delighted to tell you the story. Basically, the excise tax on alcohol has not been raised in now this year, it'll be 33 years. I partnered with Representative Ferrari, who has been an advocate on DWI. She's worked on DWI before she came to the legislature. And I got interested because there has been alcoholism, of course, in my family, I know there's been in most of our families. And I just have seen the devastation that's been wrought in so many communities. And so we started this next session will be the third time that we try to raise the excise tax. And our goal is twofold. It's not just keeping up with inflation, right? That's like sort of a given, and we hope to do that. But it's also to raise funds that won't be rated in the future. When oil and gas goes up and down, one of the first funds that gets rated are our behavioral services funds. Those get cut almost at the very beginning. And so if we have a source of funds, a source of funding that is more stable, we won't have to rely on the ups and downs of oil and gas. And we know, because it's a policy of our state, that we want to go to zero emissions. So we know that the oil and gas revenue is going to go down. We don't know when exactly. I know people have been saying we have it for at least 4 more years. Some have said we have it for 7 years. Who knows? But we need to be planning for the time that we don't have it. And this is a plan to tax the alcohol at a level that will raise sufficient funds to put into a fund that will generate income and secure future behavioral self-service, not only current behavioral health services, but behavioral health services in the future. That's why we're creating what we call the AHA Fund, the Alcohol Harms Alleviation Fund. And we set on raising the alcohol, the tax on alcohol by 25 cents a drink, because that would raise approximately $200 million in funds for sure for the first year. We don't know what impact it'll have on consumption, but 200 million is what's projected for the first year. And that's going to be a big bump to what's available. We'll put it in this fund, and then the fund will grow, but also the expenses and the programs will grow. So that's a real important part of the bill that we're sponsoring. And that's why we've set that's not the only reason we've set at 25 cents a drink. The other reason is we have met with David Jernigan and with different researchers on the impact of price on alcohol use and consumption. And what we learned is that New Mexico has the cheapest alcohol between Arizona, or among Arizona, Colorado, and Texas. Utah's kind of different because it's sold by the state, so it's hard to compare. It's cheaper and more expensive depending on what you're looking at. But generally, it's sold more cheaply in New Mexico. Even though the excise tax is about in the middle of taxes in the region, it's sold more cheaply. And that's the only time that I actually saw, for the first year, the industry didn't even blink an eyebrow. They were like not even worried about it. But the first time was when I talked to a lobbyist, Brent Moore, and I said, you know what bugs me the most about what you guys do is how cheaply you sell alcohol in this state, because you know it's a poor state. And he hemmed and hawed, and he said, oh, I don't know that's true. You'd have to have a study to see if that's true. And I said, you know what you can do? You can Google it. I was so mad because you can just Google it and see that that's true. And I think that that's problematic because the industry is making a lot of money off the backs of people in our state who are generally poorer than the surrounding states, and they're doing it by keeping their prices low. And they've been able to do this because the tax hasn't been raised in so long. So those are the two reasons that we've settled on this high a tax. It's not that we're totally inflexible, but we're going to start again where we started in the first place at 25 cents a drink. In the course of the bill going through the very first time, we did agree to lower it to 15 cents a drink, which was going to raise, I believe it was going to be about 165 million. And we thought, well, it's certainly a big, I don't know, it'll move the needle with $165 million. So we went there. I don't know if we'll go there again because I think it's really, really important that we raise the funds necessary. We are talking about a sunset provision that if the alcohol-related deaths go down to the national average and stay there for 5 years, we could reduce the tax and take it down to the level of inflation from what it was when we first implemented the tax 32 years ago. And so that's something else that we're talking about as kind of an incentive to the whole state. Look, the tax will be reduced if we can reduce the harms. So those are the provisions, the main provisions of the bill that we're talking about: creating a fund and imposing the tax. And those are two. We wouldn't do one without the other. They're very important. And I'd like to introduce now Senator Shannon Pinto, who I'm going to have the honor. I'm going to have to check in with you, Senator Pinto, because I'm going to introduce you on Saturday too. But Senator Pinto is. She actually called me and asked to join in this bill, and I was so excited. And she will tell you why. But she has a long history with the legislature. She was her grandfather. I had the privilege of overlapping with her grandfather with one session, and he was just an amazing individual, really wise individual. And so she got trained by the best. So with that, I'll turn it over to just a really wonderful colleague in the Senate, Senator Pinto.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. And well, I think for me it was a no-brainer once I knew this bill was out there, because of the effects in my particular district and how the history of alcohol. And when they decided to legalize marijuana, I was like, oh, we're going into another realm in which we don't even have a hold on the alcohol. So it was a no-brainer for me. And I think it's still one of those things that we have to move forward. And today I was able to connect with Navajo Nation on this and talk to a couple of my leaders with this particular bill, and they're ready to see the bill, and I think they're very much in support of it. And I think that's the only thing with the tribes is the impact it would have on they're part of basically the casinos, and that's probably about it. But going after the behavioral health money was very important, because when I really think about it, in my district, I do not have any facilities in that aspect. I mean, we have some available where you can come in, but to actually have somewhere you're on call, it's an opportunity where at a moment's notice, when someone's ready to go seek help, that it should be available. But that's not the case, especially if you have to drive pretty far, because that time, we know that time period works against a lot of people when you have to be put on a waiting list. So creating that opportunity is the best thing I'd like to see in my district that is available. And the effects of it, we're here talking about veterans, but all the way down from cradle to grave, curbing that and having those opportunities to have a better quality of life for a family is just, I think the impacts are there. There's a few that I've seen that were able to get out of this addiction and turn their lives around. And it wasn't just them alone that was impacted. The families, the mothers, the sisters, the uncles, everybody that sees them thrive when they're able to control and become feel better about themselves and get out there and become self-sufficient and individual is just it's a great thing to see. And I've really, being a teacher too, also being in the education system in my area and having students come in at the mid-school level, it just was it stays with you. So this is, I really can't I don't know if there's another word as far as important that could elevate the issue, and having you guys along to support it. Because my dad's a Vietnam veteran and is still, he's in his 70s, and it's been a battle his whole life. Well, I should say more of like my whole life, seeing him, because, as a child, he didn't have that access. But if there was a little better way he had the opportunity to management closer to home because of the family is basically it. They got to stay close to home, our veterans, and because they have that internal to take care and care. That's what I think that's one of the things they probably joined the military, is that overall insight to take on that role as a caretaker for the nation. And that is important. And, you know, those things that they see, we don't have control over that. And this is one of those things they try to use as coping. So I hope we're able to create that opportunity for them, especially, you know, those that are there and coming out of the military. We still have military individuals coming out that are having issues, and some instances where that's why they have to leave the military, because they have an addiction issue that they're not able to address while being in there, working in the military. So I'm just really grateful for the work of Cynthia Lopez and our experts that are along with us, that really have the data and the background to answer a lot of the questions that are there, and that I really rely on. So thank you. And Representative Kate, if you would like to weigh in on this, and thank you for joining us on this endeavor.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for sharing what you just did. For those who don't know, I'm Representative Kathleen Cates. Thank you for reminding me. I don't know why I'm in the middle of driving to Santa Fe. Well, I pulled over for this. But I really appreciate you inviting me to this. I very much appreciate the enormous amount of work that Representative Ferrari and Senator Cynthia Lopez has put into this effort. It is a very data-driven effort, as everyone has said. My background is I have been in recovery since 1990. So for 34 years, I have been alcohol and drug-free. It is a hereditary disease. It is a behavioral health disease. It is generational addiction in my family. And it is definitely a mental health issue in which for some reason alcohol has been the accepted substance abuse out of all the substance abuse, which I think has been especially harmful to our veterans. And much like tobacco, as our veterans were given packs of cigarettes for free, you know, during World War II, and alcohol and tobacco help curb appetite and many things like that. This is something that we owe to our veterans, to make sure that we have solid behavioral health services in the state of New Mexico. As we all know, that our veterans are especially harmful, are susceptible in New Mexico, have a much higher ratio of self-harm and suicide than already a vulnerable population. And I always say that substance abuse is, you feel as somebody in recovery, I will tell you, it's hard to explain, but you think your feelings are going to kill you. How you feel is going to kill you. And it's an odd thing to come to grips with, but so very necessary to create not just services, but to build a culture upon where we understand it's not accessible. I have pictures, and I'm sorry, I'm sitting next to my mom, so I don't mean to tattle on her, but I have pictures of my mom with a cigarette in her hand leaning over our crib, because that was an acceptable part of that culture at that time period, that 100 years ago when I was in the crib. And I feel like we have an opportunity to change that culture, especially in New Mexico. And this is a great step for that, to be able to fund our behavioral health services, which are so much needed. We talk about the opiate crisis. I'm not saying that the opiate and fentanyl and there's other issues that we need to address. But alcohol is that sneaky cousin that for some reason that actually is causing the larger statistical issues, and they have not been addressed. Once again, as my predecessors have said to you, we haven't raised that tax for over 30 years, 33 years, as the senator pointed out. It is time, and more efficiently, I think it's time to take that money out of the general fund and give it a direct revenue stream to behavioral health. As also our senator said, you know, when the oil and gas prices, when our boom years are over, and they will eventually become over, we as legislators should have left an infrastructure of direct funding, as we have with our early childhood education, as we are now with transportation, we have with water, and we need to do that with our behavioral health services. So this alcohol tax, I think, is going to be great for New Mexico, great for New Mexicans, and great for our veterans. And thank you so much for letting me speak. Thanks.
Thank you. I also wanted to acknowledge Joan Dickerson and Dorothy Seaton of the caucus. I was so thrilled that the caucus has put this on your priority list because of what you offer to our efforts. I mean, just your organization, your policy chop, everything. And I believe it's Dorothy. Dorothy, because I asked Joan, and Joan has another commitment. So I think Dorothy's stepping in and going to give us some specific data that affects veterans. Dorothy?
Yes, hello, and thank you, Antoinette, and Shannon and Kathleen, and anyone else that jumps on board on this effort. Thank you in advance. It's really hard to find specific veteran addiction data. The crossover of those two things are hard to find. So I did some looking around in at the federal level. SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency, they do a lot of research and publications, training publications and things like that. I also did some on National Institutes of Health, NIH, and I did a couple of organizations that were specific to addiction and veterans. But I can't really say I have data. I can say I have talking points. I can say I have information that I found on several different sources. And when you do that, not all your information agrees from one source to the other. So I haven't done any reconciliation of like the average of polls in political terms. So here in general, here it is. Veterans, when they're serving, when they are military folk, go through some terrible and traumatic things sometimes in the course of their service. And there's a lot of pressure in that career field, especially in the combat arms. So veterans will come out, and even while still serving, use substances to treat those feelings, as someone pointed out. I think that was Kathleen, and how the feelings just are overcoming you, and you feel you must do something to remedy that. So that happens with veterans. And when they're out of service, you pile on the trauma of service, plus the transition from service to civilian life, which can be very difficult for some military folks, because it's a large transition from the military world to the civilian world. And so I sent out in an email to the senator and representatives involved, and to our caucus chair, what I called a reading file, and it has a list of links. And for each one of the links, I extracted some of what I call the talking points that have some of the data points in them. like this many percent of that many percent. But one that I found particularly interesting was a study done on binge drinking. And for once, New Mexico is not in the worst category. New Mexico was in what they call the high category and the low category. We were in the low category, which was a good thing for binge drinking. However, the percent is still close to 10% of veterans that are doing binge drinking. So that's not a good thing. Comparatively speaking, in the higher category, some of the states were up to 20% of veterans doing binge drinking. So the good news is that addictions are treatable. I have a heart for this subject. I have to tell you, I'm not the only one on board, but I'm one of the ones on board that was raised as a child by an alcoholic father and a mother. So I'm a child of an alcoholic. I understand alcohol from the inside of the family. And later in my life, I got some college education and some credentials and a license to practice alcohol counseling in the prison system. So I tell people I was in prison for 13 years as a staff person. And it feels like that when you go to work, because you go through the two gates and you're locked in there during the day when you're at work. And there's no window and you can't, if you've ever visited anyone in prison or been inside a prison, it's not a pleasant place to work. But I'll say it was one of the best times of my life, working those 13 years as a clinical supervisor in an addiction program in a prison. And I just look at that as one of the segments of my life, of different careers in my life, where I got a great deal of satisfaction out of doing that. So when I heard about this bill last year, I didn't hear about it the year before, but I heard about it last year and visited with some of you and wanted to get on board testifying for the bill and supporting it. I come to it with a lot of experiences and a lot of knowledge in the field, my education and my license behind me, where I just feel it's really important for veterans, and not only for veterans, but for the families, because we don't serve alone in the military. And I will tell you that an addict and an alcoholic is not an addict and an alcoholic alone. Their families are affected by it. So I don't want to take up all your time, and I thank you for calling out me and Joan, because we do most of our work at home and nobody sees us. So rest assured, we'll be there for you this session. We look forward to working with you. And thanks, Antoinette.
Well, Joan, be assured that I see you and I see Joan, and we really appreciate it. So thank you. And that's true. I just saw Sandy Stolberg said, but we know you are there. And that's absolutely true. I also noticed that Dr. Taneja, Anjali Taneja, just joined us. I hope she doesn't mind, but I want to recognize her because she does a lot of important work on addictions, and then of course her experience. So I noticed you're here. Welcome, Anjali. So I'd like to now, I don't know if you want me to do this, or if you want to do this, Claudia, but I'd like to open it up to the group for input on the ideas, suggestions, whatever you want to talk about with us and with the work that we're doing. We always welcome input. That's one of the reasons when, we specifically list and say that, for example, the money from this would go to tribes to establish their own programs, because the feedback we got from them was, don't give programs that are outside the reservation that aren't run by us, that are not culturally specific. Give it to us. We know what to do with the money. And so it's that kind of feedback
Good
that
point.
has helped us make the bill better. And that was certainly through the leadership of Senator Pinto. So we'd like to offer the same thing to veterans. This isn't, of course, a veteran-specific bill, but we know that it'll have a positive impact because it'll open up services that are available to everyone. And I happen to know veterans who've come home addicted, either to drugs or alcohol, and they weren't addicted when they left. And as Dorothy pointed out, I'm sure it's extremely traumatic. I myself am not a veteran. My father was, but it's, you know, I'm always very supportive of veterans because I support just the love of country that you all show by serving the country. Mike?
Actually,
And can
before-
I jump in for just a second? I'd like to, after we take Mike's question or comment, I'd really like to hear from Representative Parahone. We've spoken to her offline about this at an unrelated meeting that we have, and I'd love to hear her comments. But please, over to Mike, sir.
Hello. I moved from Farmington to Gallup in 2000. And at the time, they had some center which, as far as I could tell, amounted to a drunk tank. It handled 6 people. And I got close enough to it that you could smell the vomit. And how you're going to send somebody in there for the night? And it was just a place to sleep it off while they were drunk. Now there is some form of a treatment center that's over at the old juvenile jail on Hassler Valley Road. I went over there several times and knocked on the door to see if I could talk to them, but they wanted to see me like a dead skunk, I guess. They never called back. But I'd like to point out a couple of things. One, you're talking about, well, if I had 200 million or I have 165 million. And Senator Pinto brought up an excellent point. There's no place close. Why don't you decide what you need and say, this is the minimum that would get this going or get it started. The second thing is I worked for a convenience store chain for a long time. And when the state stopped allowing drinking on Sundays or selling on Sundays, it made no difference in the weekly sale of alcohol. It doesn't do a thing. Something I think might be effective, I don't know if you've got enough time to do this, but if you look at a C-store in the morning, people going to work, they're grabbing their 6-packs and their 12-packs. Count those people. And you might count them in the district of Senator No, who says we don't need to raise the tax. But you can sure do it here. Down in the southeast part of the state where you got those oil workers, I'm sure you've got a lot of that going on because when I was in Farmington, there was a lot of it going on there. And it goes on here in Gallup, but it's demonstrative evidence. You know, we sat at the Mike's chain of C-stores, and there were 39 people in an hour. They came out with a 12-pack between 7 and 8 a.m. on the way to work. Do you want them on the road with you?
Wow.
Let's see. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Shannon, Senator Pinto, if you want to respond, and then I have a little response too.
Okay. So one of the things too with working on this bill is we talked to a lot of people that ran programs and actually compiled a list and found out how short, what was the shortfall, how much did it cost to run these programs? And that's where we kind of hit around that 250 million. Be really nice if we could get 300 million in there, because that would mean, we're not just trying to meet the need right now, but we could maybe get a little bit more ahead of this. And I'm glad you talked about not in the Georgia Center, about the drunk tank, because I had personal, not me being in there, but I knew someone that worked there and describing the situation. But those facilities in my area too are at capacity. They've been at capacity time over time over time. And if you get in trouble, you get these facilities are at capacity, there's nowhere for the judge but to sentence them to go to jail and do jail time, because there's no place for them. It has to be feasible. And our judges in my area, one of my judges does know that. She goes, it needs to, if this opportunity is there for them to get treatment, it has to be within 30 miles. Because if you're going outside of that, you're just working against the individual. So they had this checklist going, they had a great program going. But one of the things, right, during COVID, a little bit after, is they hit their max capacity at the beginning of the year within 2 months. And I was like, well, what are we supposed to do the rest of the year? And she goes, I don't know. She goes, and it was driving her crazy too. But we did do some work. Our experts in Senator Cedillo Lopez and Representative Ferrari, during that time when I joined in, I believe we were compiling that list to make sure that these opportunities and all these programs that were out there helping to alleviate this issue, how many are there? Because they're all over. They're in every department. I mean, we might even see some here in the Veterans Department that we are going to make sure that we try to get them some program money. Go ahead, Senator Lopez.
That's exactly true. Senator Pinto answered it. We have been meeting with programs and asking them for their wish list. And we could easily spend $200 million if we gave every program what they wanted. It'd take a little while to gear up to that, which is why we're hoping that we can kind of have the funds and have them grow and then replenish it, kind of like the Peter Worth's fund. He's got a fund like that. You can spend, you don't just hold on to it, you can spend it down, but you're also leaving some in that will grow. And we have some calculations on that. But yeah, Mike, it's an excellent idea and we have done it. And we learned a lot about programs in New Mexico and how, just as Senator Pinto said, they all feel understaffed. And I don't see Anjali anymore, Doctor.
Well, I'd like to talk about the second question.
Oh, yes.
Or not question, but about the C-stores. Because we know some of the results of one of the legislative pieces that we supported kind of ended up where these stores had to choose. Either you're going to sell gas or you're going to sell alcohol. And next thing you know, in our Zuni area, they decide, because that's where the profit was, we're going to close this and next. So getting this also, I think, will help us try to get into the area where hopefully our dispensers will become a little bit more socially responsible as we go forward, trying to maybe even create stores in which the liquor is sold establishment, where you can't just go in. What I've seen is people shoplift it and bring it out, but that you're actually having that time where you go in and you're, even to the point where it's not even refrigerated. And I know there's been bills like that. And people say, well, we tried it back then. I'm like, well, the atmosphere right now, if this gets going, maybe there's some other things we can put in place to actually hinder our underage drinking, hinder some of the binge drinking that happens in our higher education institutions where, students end up getting in trouble, then they get kicked out of college because of hazing and all these other things that come along with access to this. So, hope.
Mike, we have that list. Are you suggesting we publish it and share it?
I think you should, and if you do it to the local newspapers for your area, my area, here's what it looks like. The radio stations to the local newspapers, they're looking for news. Here's site-specific data. And regarding what Senator Pinto said, stop this deal where it's either gas or alcohol. Whatever you do, that's a no-brainer. It's not going to work. But yeah, I'd say put it out there. Here's what we need. And it turns out it costs this much. And the only way we can get to this cost is the best way is through a tax. You start with what you need. This is specific. Everybody needs money. Why in the hell do you want yours? Well, I got this problem and here's how I can solve it.
Very good idea. Very good suggestion. I hope we could figure out the capacity to make that happen. But yeah, that is really good. So,
Senator Cedillo Lopez, I think Angeli is coming back shortly. Can we jump over to Representative Parahone and then Isaac? Would you be up after that, sir?
And
Right.
absolutely, I also want to mention that Representative Parajon is also working on an alcohol bill. I hope she comes on board with ours, and maybe we can fold them together. We've been chatting about that. So I'm delighted. I'm her senator, although she's not my rep because I've got 4 reps in my district, but very excited to have Representative Parajon on board with us.
Thank you so much, Senator. And yes, Senator Cedillo Lopez is my senator. I love her. And yeah, I'm just like really, really honored to be here in such an incredible group of powerful women of color working on this issue. And so just like Senator Antoinette said, there's several alcohol bills. I definitely agree that, I think we should definitely examine them, and we'll be in committee and tax committee on Friday to do that with the tax chairs of the House committee and the Senate. And the role that I've played really for some of the bills has been addressing the way that the funding is distributed. My background is I used to work for the city of Albuquerque in homelessness services, which often involves also addiction services. And one of I was in charge of the Gateway Project and the programming for it. So one of the areas that I worked on was the Detox Center, which is part of the group of services that they're building out there at Gateway, including services for veterans, since the Veteran Service Center is right next to the old Loveless Hospital. And, the detox center that we're building, it's going to be the first in the state. It's one of 60 in the country. So it's a huge step forward. And the funding that the city was able to procure from that was through the county. And so my role has kind of been understanding how we actually bridge the bringing in of the funding and how we distribute it effectively to our local city and county government. So I was really lucky to attend the Association of Counties annual meeting that they held in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and to really listen to them and understand how their DWI programs work and what changes we can make in the current statute to make sure that that funding is something that they can actually utilize in the best way possible. So for instance, right now, DWI dollars, if you don't use them, they lose them and they revert back into the DWI fund. So counties have a very short period of time to expend those funds and to be able to utilize them. Another thing that you can't utilize DWI dollars for is physical capital projects, which is a huge issue because you think about all the treatment centers, wraparound programs that we need with these taxes. Some of them will involve building centers like the detox center that we're building out here in Albuquerque. Just as Senator Pinto said, that there aren't, and in many counties in New Mexico, there are no treatment centers. So one of the things updates would be to update for those DWI dollars for them to not be reverting so that DWI programs could keep the funds and build towards a project, for instance, building a detox center, and that would also be an option for those programs. And so, yeah, part of the allocation is also for the study of the alcohol tax. Senator Cedillo Lopez mentioned like a sunset clause in the bill, and in order to do that right, we would need funding to study what is happening with the tax. So that is one of the provisions in some of the other alcohol tax bills that we have floating around. So the final thing I'll say is just that this has been a really great group to work with, and I really do believe, just as Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez said, we're moving towards really creating a big change here in New Mexico. My mom is a public health practitioner and trained community health workers in rural areas. And growing up, that's what I did too, is I would accompany her on a horse and ride many hours into the rural areas and work with community workers, many who had, high school, sixth grade educations. And she said to me when I first got elected, she said, if there's anything that you can do to help New Mexico related to public health, like the one thing that you could do for public health in New Mexico would be to address the alcohol deaths in our state. Everyone is impacted by this, especially our young people who are my age. When I was in high school, I lost a friend to drunk driving. I mean, how many of us have these stories? I know two friends just in the past 2 months who have lost friends to drunk driving accidents. So this is really, really important, really personal for me, as it is for so many of us here working on this. And I'm really, really hopeful and really looking forward to the 60-day session. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think everybody's got a personal story. Young, old. When I was young, we lost, high school classmates, and then things kind of taper off, and then you lose them for other reasons. But it's always the drunk driving that takes the young folks and others, and it impacts so many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. So Isaac, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you all for tackling an important issue. I mean, I think we've all had issues, either personal or in our families. I mean, my uncle died of cirrhosis of the liver, and he was a military vet. And it was a cycle that even though we tried to get him the help, it just wasn't going to happen. And he had to make that personal decision. And I mean, I know my grandmother probably spent $200,000 getting him as much treatment as she possibly could, and just he wasn't willing to make that effort. One of the things that in researching this topic, because my firm is actually doing a documentary on kind of that evolution on what's happening, and looking at what happened in Utah when they actually moved their down to 0.05 instead of 0.08. And you're starting to see a lot of different states beginning to look at modifying that. So I know California has a bill going out right now. I know that Michigan, you have Hawaii, you have Oregon, and what they're seeing is that there's a reduction of about 60% in fatalities when you reduce that level. And the other part is they do a very good job of explaining what alcohol content level is in relationship to when somebody's at a bar. I don't think most people fully comprehend the idea of, well, it's a beer or two, or it's a cocktail or two. Well, I mean, a cocktail or two can be a three wise men go hunting. And I mean, that's 5.5 shots of alcohol in one cocktail. So it's really one of those things of just trying to figure out how to navigate that. The second point that I think would be, so the first thing is maybe a consideration to lower the blood alcohol content level to see if that's an option. Number two, a matching fund. We're not going to have oil and gas funds for a while. So I think maybe a provision of this would be whatever monies this does create, have a matching fund so that the general fund matches it up to 5 years so that you have longevity of this program. The worst part is to raise this type of money and then you do hit those numbers, and then the system crashes on itself, and now you have all of these providers and various individuals who you've brought on to address behavioral health issues that can't pay for it. So that's the second part. And then the third part is looking at this from a different angle. I think one of our biggest provisions in our state that really causes us some challenges is the anti-donation clause. That we can't use these funds directly with service agents or with nonprofit entities that can actually go out there and do this work. The worst part is I think state government thinks that they can fix it all. And it is incredibly dangerous, I think, for us to only focus in on giving the money to the health department or to human services. There are great organizations that are working with youth and afflicted individuals in tribal nations. Members of our African American, members of our veteran community, and they're doing great work. And if we can help provide a provision that allows these funds to actually move to them, they could do, I think, a much better job, maybe in some instances than our state agencies. So kind of three different areas: the reducing the level of blood alcohol content level. Number two, really trying to figure out how do we create an opportunity where it's not just about the small picture, but the bigger picture. And then the third part of reducing the anti-donation clause. So I know some ideas to throw out and how we create more funding, because to tackle this is going to take hundreds of millions of dollars as a long-term effort.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. With regard to the anti-donation clause, the way we're giving it to tribes and nonprofits is setting up, because we've talked to them, is what you do is you set up an application process, and they apply for it to accomplish these objectives. And what we want to do is something, and I talked to the people at Mescalero, and they said, yeah, we want to be accountable. Give us the money and we'll tell you what we do with it. And so it would be a simple application where they apply, we expect certain outcomes, and then they just report on whether they did it. So we can get around the anti-donation clause. You're absolutely right about the amount of money. At first, I thought $200 million was an enormous sum of money. It's not even what we need once we gear up. We just can't spend it all in 1 year. Just because gearing up takes a little while. That's why we decided to create a fund, and hopefully we would get additional funds later. The matching fund is a great idea. I think that's terrific. So
I think maybe the other provision with like your nonprofits, I think one of the biggest challenges, you need those fiscal agents. And the minute you start throwing money at DFA, you start throwing money at the health department and everything else, that money doesn't always get to those entities. You guys understand that from your junior money appropriations, your capital outlay, all the things that you're already doing. And so it creates this cycle of challenges where you now have an entity that could do great work. You're putting those funds into that area because you think it's going to accomplish that goal. And then either the nonprofit never gets it, or the state agency kind of encumbers it and puts it in another area. Or the RFP process that goes to that is laborious. And now we're waiting a 2-year process for that to actually happen. So I think clearing that up would really make some key efforts. And legislation is probably the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish that.
absolutely good points. Absolutely. I see Dr. Taneja. Dr. Taneja, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi, everyone. I just got home, so I was off video, and I have to jump to another meeting, but I was really excited to be on this much of the Zoom call. I'm a family med doctor, and I'm board certified in addiction medicine, and I've done a lot of work around legislation, also around related issues, including ensuring medications for addiction treatment in jails and prisons here in New Mexico. And I guess just two things that I would want to say to add to this is that we would love to organize health workers around these bills as they get set up. So we, out of my organization, Casa de Salud, we organize about 150 health workers around the state on various issues. So we'd love to mobilize folks around this and know that there will be excitement. And also, I don't know if you all have been in touch with the newer chapter of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM. It's only about 2 years old, the chapter, but I'm sure the chapter would love to take on and endorse and help support with addiction medicine providers and other advocates, any bills. So I'll just name those. I can put my email and phone number in the chat, and just really grateful to everyone here.
Absolutely. We will follow up on that. Thank you, Dr. Taneka. That's great. We had not. So that's amazing. Thank you. Great to see you. Claudia?
There's a lot of people with a lot of great impact and not impact, with a lot of great ideas that could be quite impactful. This is an excellent forum and a good discussion. I'd like to go back to three issues, comments. I think that's a great idea about dropping, the blood alcohol content from 0.08 to 0.05. That's exactly what we don't want people doing, is drinking and driving. So raising that penalty would be excellent. But I really want to focus in on that last one, that anti-donation clause, which was brought apart in our Constitution because of the railroad barons. So this is a couple years ago. It's still there, and it's just having a very harmful effect on so many of the nonprofits. So I'm on the board with the Veterans Integration Center, and Senator Cedillo Lopez, you went over there with a few of us, Bob and Diane, and got a tour. They've got a beautiful facility, which you can get through capital outlay, at the state level, and certainly through, I think Melanie Stansberry helped quite a bit. But the operating budget, they need an operating budget. So they got these beautiful rooms, great facilities, but they want the wraparound services. They're taking veterans off the street and their families, and they're bringing them in, but they want the entire thing. It is so hard to get a steady annual operating budget. And if the legislators send it to DVS, DVS doesn't always follow up, or they're going through a series of leadership changes or whatever the situation is, and they don't get their money. It takes almost a year to get the money that was set aside by the legislators. Used to be junior money. Now it's
grow money.
Whatever. They keep changing the name and all that. You're supposed to go to the Council of Governors, and I mean, it's a disaster. Nobody understands it, and they can't get the money. And when they send it to these various fiscal agents, those organizations are not resourced financially, and they don't have the trained staff to be able to execute that new mission statement that they've been handed, that they didn't ask for, but they've been handed. And we think in terms of Bernalillo County or Santa Fe, or maybe down in Las Cruces, but Farmington, Hidalgo, Lee County, I mean, pick these places. They certainly don't have the money or the staffing or the expertise to do this. So we have to get rid of that anti-donation clause. And I know that Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino and a few others have been working on that, and they still are. They have regular meetings, but I hope you other legislators here, will give them a listen, because this impacts so much of what we want to do. And the state agencies can't handle it. It needs to go to the experts, who are often the nonprofits. So I guess I'm just piling on because I really agree with that last point, especially Isaac. Thank you.
Claudia, this is Dorothy. I'd like a minute, please. One thing I've experienced as a licensed professional in the addiction field, and as a contractor of federal money and a contractor of state money and what have you, is that one thing that's going to be really important for this is stability, so that it's a real long game, so that you are training staff and developing services for a given community or statewide, and that you have a steady funding stream to pay those people and run your facility, and that it doesn't fluctuate too much from one year to the next. So you have to fire people that are qualified one year, and then the next year you have openings and no people. The fluctuation of this is a real killer. So we need the fund to have kind of a backup cushion so that as programs are stood up and developed and actual people work to get their credentials and their licenses and work to get hired, that it's sustainable for the employees and for the community that it serves. Because one of my challenges as a counselor, I would tell people, put me out of business. Go ahead. Make it so you don't ever need a drug and alcohol counselor. But I knew that that would never happen because there's always a need for services and there's always new people coming into the system. So from that standpoint, I think stability and longevity are going to be really important considerations for this fund.
That's a really good point. This is going to sound weird because we're hearing so many negative things about CYFD, but when I was at Enlace Comunitario, we got our state funds through CYFD. That was the agency, that was the fiscal agency that distributed our year-long contracts to provide services through our organization. Those contracts were always timely. We did during the Martinez administration get a few cuts, but they were called shaves, which is one of the reasons I want to, make sure this money is stabilized. Good job. And I think what's happening is when you send it to DFA or other organizations that aren't used to giving out contracts, they don't know how to do it, and then they don't have their trusted agencies. Like the application process was like a one-pager. And we would get our funds, and then the report on the funds was like a 2-pager. And it just was not burdensome. It's burdensome. We got federal funds too, and that was really burdensome. But I think the point on the nonprofit clause, the anti-donation clause is well taken. There are workarounds, and I don't want people to think, oh, we can't do this because we can't give it to nonprofits. We can, if the agencies know what they're doing. And the feedback, I think, was especially good with this, because we've got to ensure that the money goes to where it needs to go, including those nonprofits that we've been out talking to, and including, remember I mentioned that when we did the tour, this could be another source for them for the funds for the treatment funds. And so, but we got to make sure that it gets to where it needs to go. And that
those organizations really are ready and able to do it. Both America Serves and the VIC have been stuck. They can't.
And that could be training them, but it could also be training the people who are running these contracts. 'Cause sometimes they're just not well trained, so they do a poor job of running the contracts. Specifically
with the veterans, the Department of Veteran Services has had 3 different secretaries in as many years, and that's not helpful.
Yeah. So no, this is excellent feedback. Bob?
Yes, I just wanted to mention, I been on a couple of boards of nonprofits, and when you have donors, the least sexy thing is donations for operating costs.
Right.
They'd like to see a building or a new program.
Yep.
And what we really needed was money to, pay for the janitors, or to pay for the people, or to pay expenses for traveling somewhere. And that gets to stability and longevity. You really need to recognize that the only way you're going to have stability and longevity is if you have long-term funding for operating costs. So that's just a comment when I was listening to you talking about the stability and longevity, it almost always comes down to operating costs.
And that's what the Vic is experiencing. As you saw, people want to have a star on the wall, says they donated, supported, but they need to hire people and they need to run the facility and they need to pay their heating bill. Those kind of non-sexy things. Exactly, Bob.
Absolutely. The overhead cost, or like the university used to call it, indirect costs.
Yeah.
Need to be, yeah, absolutely.
Is
Excellent.
there anybody else on board here that we haven't heard from, that's got something they'd like to share? Julie, Mark, Sandy, Patty, it's wonderful to have you folks on board. And if you don't have anything to share, that's fine, but we've got an opportunity here. Julie?
Yeah, no, this is Julie. I don't have anything additional to share. I do think it's very exciting to think about the ways in which we can generate money. There was one, I can't remember the meeting I went to, but they said New Mexico, other than South Dakota, has the second highest rate of cirrhosis of the liver. We have an alcohol issue here in New Mexico.
Yeah.
We're number one.
I just want to jump in and say Julie is my brand new legislative assistant. So please welcome her and know that you can get to me if you're having trouble reaching me through Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sandy is good. How about Patty French? Or Mark Finlay?
I've seen Amina Everett here in the middle of my screen for a
Oh,
while.
and Amina. Yes,
And
ma'am.
I've been wondering if she wanted to weigh in on this as a potential legislator.
Thank
Please.
you very much. I am sitting here at my desk. Sorry, I'm not coming on. I'm sitting here at my desk trying to do multitasking with canvassing and listening. And I am just impressed with the getting the information that I need to know, the background information. Usually when you're funding programs like this and you have agencies, you don't want to take it through the staff at the state agency. So you have organizations that are experts in delivering services. Those are the ones that you want to work with, and those are the ones that you want to grow. You want to help them grow in capacity. And so that's, this is one way. I know we've had devastation in past administrations with our substance abuse and mental health programs. So I'm glad to hear that there's still organizations around that we can call on and we can channel this money to. I just have a question about the tribal community, and there was a comment about those funds being given directly to them, and they know how to administer them. And I want to know, how do we know that? I'm coming totally blank on this. I don't know what programs they've run. Maybe Antoinette, you can bring us up to speed, because I think that's an important thing. I actually do believe that the funds should go to them, but I also would make sure that they have capacity in what they're doing. So I feel like that's a situation where the funds are going to them as a grant after they submitted some kind of proposal to us that says, this is what we intend to do with the money. So those are.
I can't speak for all of the tribes, and I certainly want to turn it over to Shannon, but I will say that I worked with the folks at Mescalero because we had a meeting, this was before the fires, down in Ruidoso, and I got to tour the facility that they fund. And of course, they don't have enough. They're using casino funds and whatever, and they had a really amazing facility. Wasn't as big as they would like, but they also talked about the experience they had with a state-funded facility outside the boundaries of the reservation, which was harder for their people to access. But also the biggest thing is it really wasn't culturally sensitive to to the way they approached the problems. And so, I mean, to me, it was very, very convincing. The tribes have a lot more capacity than you think, and this also helps build their capacity. They don't have the resources they need to have the kinds of programs that they need, and this would be another source of resources. Senator Pinto?
Yes, thank you, Senator Lopez, and thank you for the question. Because even this discussion today, there's a very sensitive about sovereignty. So us trying to dictate to them how they should do this, so the money flows the way it flows because it's government to government. But being accountable for it is one of the things they will do internally. But we do that with education funds. And one of the things that was brought up today was about the tribal regalia. And they're like, well, we just want to make sure they can wear whatever. But you had to have tribal consultation with them because there was a pullback on it from one of the elders saying, okay, yeah, but some of those artifacts, well, I don't know if you want to say artifacts, but some of those, the regalia in that sense are sacred, in which you don't wear it in public, in which if you go to a pueblo, it's kind of like you go to the dances and they tell you no photos, no pictures, because there's a fine line there that you have to respect in that way. So when we go over there and that stream of funding and about it being culturally sensitive is also one of the aspects, because they're still building that capacity to make sure it's relevant. And it's the same thing with our bilingual teachers that are there. They know the language, but a lot of them to our elders. So how do we continue to make sure that line is still, that we're supporting it? So, but thank you for the question. And I try to make sure I do consult my tribes, nations, and pueblos on that and make sure the opportunity is there, in which we also make sure that we're not restricting funding when we put it out there with the words we use in the bill.
Absolutely. And that's the important, government to government work we did with them is, and like Senator Pinto said, we already do it in other areas. And like I said, I was really impressed with their facility down. I don't know what happened after the fire. I hope everything's okay, but it was so impressive.
I would like to thank you very much. I'm the new kid on the block, and cultural sensitivity is critical to me. I think it's extremely important. And I am going to be hanging around you two ladies, hopefully, and learning as much as I possibly can. And I thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think Diane Gooderud, yes, ma'am, there you go.
No, I just wanted to know what was the biggest hurdle last year. It was such a short session, and the lobby, and the taxation committee and getting people on board, is it they wanted to tax the distributors or what is the difference and what is the hurdle that you think you might come across? And do you feel stronger about it going into this session? And I know we're going to work towards whatever you guys decide to do and help you advocate, but I was just curious about that because I'm still not clear.
There are some folks who don't feel that we should tax at all because we have so much money that we shouldn't be raising taxes. And, it's hard to sell them on planning ahead for the time we don't have taxes. I think as Isaac said, we need to build these funds for that time. And I totally agree with that. But I think having this tax in place, it's hard to tax when you're in a downward spiral. And so it's now that we're not people keep saying we're a poor state. We're not a poor state. So now is the time to really set things in place so we never get into that position again. But I heard that a lot is I don't understand why you're proposing a tax increase when we have so much money. And so that's one thing I think we need to address. As Representative Barajón said, we're working with her and with others in the tax committee to try to resolve a lot of these issues among legislators early, so we don't have them come up during session when it's kind of late to do anything about them. So that's the plan. And also having you guys and having so many other organizations behind us, the movement toward this keeps growing and
Good, thank you.
Yeah, there was a few that were caught off guard, because you would think we're all legislators in the same boat together, but when we have our own personal background, and then we're on certain committees, some of us don't get to dive into a lot of these things. I don't want to say I'm fortunate, but in my district, there are a lot of issues on the table for me that I really am trying to have a little bit of everything there. And for some, it's not that way. So when we came with the bill too, some of them were surprised. And then all these numbers started coming out. Some were very understanding of it right away, and others needed to digest it. And the time period just was not enough for them. They were very hesitant to move forward because they weren't sure how to go forward. So I hope it's there now, and we'll be able to get a little bit further.
Thank you.
Well, we certainly want to help you work on that. And as Dorothy mentioned, she found some good data that we can use, some bullets, and they are sourced. And also Mark Finley did a deep dive today and came up with lots of good stuff. So I think these position papers, in our 4 short years of working together as a caucus, these position papers seem to be helpful, where you've got one sheet of paper, both sides, and you talk about what the issues are, kind of the pros and cons. Obviously, we're selling it, so the pros outweigh the cons, but you need to address them. And then what I also have seen is that when we compare New Mexico to all the other states and the states right around our neighborhood, legislators and people listen to that. New Mexico is at the bottom of some lists we don't want to be on the bottom, and the top of some lists we don't want to be on the top. But when you look and see where we are, and then you go to those states and see what their legislation was that got them out of the doghouse, maybe that's something we can work on. So we're ramping up. Dorothy's going to have her Committee for Veterans Advocacy team, rolling here. They're going to start some training, but I think those position papers are very helpful. But I would like your feedback, how you feel, because I know you've seen them. It's always on veterans issues, but you've seen them in your committees. Is that something that would be beneficial for your team?
extremely effective. That's one of the reasons I was so thrilled that you guys are on board. You're very effective as a caucus.
Okay. Well, so those papers, Dorothy, we got our merchant orders.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of good writers. I came across another one, a woman I've known for close to 20 years, who's an Air Force Reserve veteran. But her civilian career was in geology, but she's just a sponge for information. And I told her what we were doing in the caucus for these position papers, and she said, "Oh, I'm very interested in taking complex information and crunching it down into a one-page information sheet for people that are learning about us." Okay, you're hired. So I think I have that writer, and we have Mark Finley on board, who's a very good writer, and I'm hoping that he'll participate in that. Claudia has done some really outstanding writing on position papers. Tammy has done some. Joan and I have done some. But when I mentioned those last few names, we all have multiple roles in the caucus. We're not just a paper writer, we're 10 other things. So finding a new good writer is like a treasure for me.
It is. And we've got a new communications chair, Walt Borton, who's on board tonight.
Right, too.
Who's got a long history that's very interesting and very appropriate for what we're doing. And he's taken over communications. And we sent out a survey, and how many new writers did we pick up, Walt?
Well, I think out of 560 people in the caucus, we got 10 volunteers.
We got a
But I
lot.
don't know how many of them were writers.
There were four people who indicated an interest in writing. I'm now talking with them individually on the telephone and letting a couple people know that you're going to be in touch with them, Dorothy. I'll be giving you their information as I finish these phone calls.
Yeah, at some point, Walt, just not so we don't take up too much of everybody's time with
Right,
internal
you and I
business.
need to talk.
I'll be having a meeting with that crew.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So we'll be ready for you. And we also absolutely support any bills that professionalize the legislature, because this, 1 or 2 month sprint, it's not working.
Well, I
We
can
also
tell you I've
find
had,
that legislation that doesn't, on the face of it, look like a veterans bill becomes interesting to veterans and military families, like this alcohol issue. On the face of it, it's not a veterans bill. But embedded in the bill are issues that impact veterans and military families more strongly than the general population. So we'll get behind things that are behavioral health related, housing related, other kinds of subject matter if there's a big impact on veterans.
great.
All right. Well, do we have any closing remarks, senators?
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much. I really do believe that this is the kind of bill that can move the needle in our state and get us off some of these bad lists.
Yes.
I'd love to see that.
Because it'll affect education. It'll affect so many aspects of family life.
It will. It keeps families alive. It keeps them together.
Yep.
Representative Herndon, Chair Herndon, is there anything you'd like to add to wrap up, ma'am?
So I would just like to say I'm really grateful for these women who have come forth and brought this wonderful piece of legislation. I can tell you that it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle, but it's one that I think that they're ready for. There've been lots and lots of comments and lots of committee meetings that have been going on where a lot of information has been released. And so I know that they're going to be ready for it. And thank you all for the support that you're providing, not only for having this joint caucus webinar, but also for the great legislation that's being put forth.
Yes.
I second that. And Pamela, it's always a pleasure working with you. I'm so glad you mentioned that when you were doing your report at the SBC. I thought, let's jump on this. This will be fun. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody's time and their expertise. And we look forward to kind of getting all hands on deck to move this forward during the long 60-day session that's coming up. And this has been recorded, so Ivan will get the link sorted out and we'll put it on the website. So if you want to share it with anyone, I know this is a tremendously busy time. I mean, we had 25 people on board today, and it's like 25 days to the election. So this is hard to do, but really appreciate it. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank
Have a
you
wonderful
all.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.